Hello, in this video we're going to look at some of the mechanics of respiration. Uh, First we will talk about the mechanics of ventilation using pressure-volume relationships, and then we're going to define some major respiratory volumes and capacities as we look at a spirogram and the different volumes and capacities that change as you breathe in and out in different ways. All right, so pulmonary ventilation is the act of breathing, which can be described as the movement of air into and out of the lungs. It's driven by the amount of force that is exerted by gases in the air surrounding any given surface. So it's going to be the atmospheric pressure. It's going to be driven also by the intraalveolar pressure. This is the air pressure within the alveoli. And it's finally going to be driven by the intrapleural pressure. This is the pressure within the pleural cavity that you learned about in the previous video. Quick note about Boyle's law. So Boyle's law describes a relationship between volume and pressure that a gas has at a constant temperature. So it boils down to, pun intended, P1V1 equals P2V2. So likewise, if volume decreases, the pressure has to increase in order to maintain this relationship. So here you can see the volume increasing, therefore the pressure has to decrease, and on the right, as the volume decreases, the pressure increases. So let's look at some of these relationships within the lungs. The atmospheric pressure is pushing down into the trachea from the outside air. It is going to eventually go to the intraalveolar pressure. So changes during, this is going to change during different phases of breathing, but because it is open to the atmospheric pressure, it's always going to equalize with that pressure. The intrapleural pressure is going to also change during the different phases of breathing. However, it's always going to be lower than the intraalveolar pressure. And then finally, you have the transpulmonary pressure. This is the difference between the intrapleural and the intraalveolar pressures. The higher transpulmonary pressure results in a larger lung, thus expanding the lung in the thoracic cavity. When you breathe, you go through the process of inspiration and expiration. So inspiration is the process that causes air to enter the lungs, and expiration is what causes lungs to exit. So a single respiratory cycle is going to be one sequence of inspiration and expiration. So inspiration is going to make use of external intercostal muscles and the diaphragm, which contract, thus increasing the volume of the thoracic cavity, while expiration is going to be when the external intercostal muscles and diaphragm relax, thus decreasing the volume of the thoracic cavity. Now you have different modes of breathing that are going to affect how deep the breath actually is occurring. So first of all, you have quiet breathing or eupnea. This is the normal breathing that occurs at rest, where the diaphragm and the intercostals contract. In forced breathing, which is hyperpnea, this is going to require muscle contractions during both inspiration and expiration. So there's going to be additional muscles that are accessory that contract. Primarily, it's the internal intercostals that are going to help compress the rib cage, thus reducing the volume of the thoracic cavity. Deep breathing is known as diaphragmatic breathing. So this is going to be the type of breathing that requires the diaphragm to contract. And shallow breathing is going to be the costal breathing. This is going to require just the intercostal muscles to contract. So if you're having shallow breaths, you're not necessarily making use of the diaphragm where deep breaths do. But normal breath is going to generally have, which we call quiet breathing, both the intercostals and the diaphragm contracting. All right, so let's talk about these different pulmonary volumes. So we have several different volumes. A respiratory volume is the term used for the various volumes of air that are moved by or associated with the lungs at any given time. So the four major ones are the inspiratory reserve volume, the tidal volume, the expiratory reserve volume, and the residual volume. Let's start with the tidal volume. This is the amount of air that normally enters the lungs during quiet breathing. Generally, this is about 500 milliliters. The expiratory reserve volume is the amount of air you can forcefully exhale. So if you are normally breathing and then you push more out, that is the extra expiratory reserve volume that you're getting there. The inspiratory reserve volume is produced by a deep inhalation. So if you're breathing in normally and then you force yourself to take in more air, that is where the inspiratory reserve volume is coming from. Your reserve or your residual volume is the air that is left in your lungs if you exhale as much air as possible. So you breathe all the way out. That leaves the residual air in the lungs, which is going to keep them from collapsing. All right, so let's talk about some capacities as well. So a respiratory capacity is the combination of two or more selected volumes and describes the amount of air in the lungs in a given time. So your total lung capacity is going to be the sum of all the lung volumes. So your inspiratory reserve volume, your tidal volume, your expiratory reserve volume, and your residual volume make up the total lung capacity. The inspiratory capacity, so this is going to be the tidal volume plus the inspiratory reserve volume. So that's essentially how much air you can breathe in beyond what would occur when you normally exhale. While your functional residual capacity, this is going to be a combination of your residual volume and your expiratory volume. So if you're breathing normally, you have your tidal volume here. It's when you force more air out plus the residual volume that accounts for the residual volume. If you look at taking a very deep breath, taking as much air as possible, and then breathing all that out, what you breathed out was your vital capacity. So this is a combination of the inspiratory reserve volume, the tidal volume, and the expiratory volume. All right, I hope that helped you understand some of the pulmonary volumes and the processes that are involved in breathing. I'll see you next time.